A hospital ER froze in terror when a massive white tiger walked through the doors. No cage, no handlers. She wasn't attacking. She was carrying something. Gently. Desperately. Doctors had seconds to decide whether to run or trust her. What they discovered next changed everything. Before you scroll, before you assume this is just another animal rescue story, pause. Because what you're about to hear never should have happened, and yet it did. Right in the middle of the United States. Imagine walking into a place meant for healing, only to come face to face with an animal that could end your life in seconds. No warning. No cage. No handlers. Just raw fear, screaming civilians, and one impossible decision that would change dozens of lives forever. This isn't a story about danger. It's a story about desperation. About a creature that crossed every instinct it had left, because it had no other choice. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a single moment exposed an underground operation no one knew existed, and how one act of compassion triggered a rescue that stretched across state lines. But fair warning, this story takes a turn you will not see coming. If you believe animals feel fear, loyalty, and love, subscribe now. If you believe compassion can stop a tragedy, stay with me until the end. Because once you hear why this animal showed up where it did, you'll never look at rescue stories the same way again. I was halfway through a night shift at Redwood Valley Medical Center in Northern California when the screaming started. At first, it sounded like a fight, raised voices, chairs scraping, panic echoing down the corridor. Then the alarms went silent. Every monitor, every intercom, as if the building itself froze. I stepped out of the triage room and felt my stomach drop. Standing in the emergency entrance was a massive animal, easily 8 feet long, its striped body rigid, its breath slow and controlled. People pressed themselves against walls. A security guard dropped his flashlight. No one moved. What stopped me cold wasn't the animal's size. It was what she carried. Clenched gently in her jaws was a tiny, motionless cub, wrapped awkwardly in what looked like torn fabric. The mother's eyes weren't wild. They weren't aggressive. They were locked on the nurse's station, focused, urgent, almost pleading. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, it's a tiger." A white one. Police sirens wailed in the distance. I knew what would happen when they arrived. I also knew that if this animal meant harm, it would have already happened. Instead, she took one slow step forward, then stopped. That was when I realized something was terribly wrong. The police arrived faster than I expected. 2 squad cars screeched to a stop outside the emergency entrance, followed by an unmarked unit. Officers poured in with weapons already raised, shouting commands no one was listening to. Patients cried. A nurse collapsed into a chair, covering her face. The tigress didn't flinch. She lowered her massive head just enough to keep the cub secure, her muscles coiled tight beneath pale fur. One wrong sound, one sudden step, and this place would become a crime scene. "Everyone get back!" an officer yelled. I stepped forward instead. My name is Dr. Evan Holt, and before I ever wore a white coat, I spent 3 years volunteering at wildlife sanctuaries across Arizona and New Mexico. I'd been close enough to big cats to feel their breath. I knew the difference between a predator about to attack and a mother about to lose everything. "She's not here to hurt anyone," I said, loud enough for the officers to hear. "If she wanted blood, you'd already be dead." One officer tightened his grip on the trigger. Then the impossible happened. The tigress slowly lowered her head and placed the cub on the tile floor between us, carefully, gently, before stepping back. She sat down and waited. That's when I saw it clearly. She wasn't demanding anything. She was asking. I dropped to my knees beside the cub. Up close, the situation was worse than I feared. The tiny body was burning hot, yet trembling, its breath shallow and uneven. When I gently pinched the loose skin at the back of its neck, It didn't spring back. Severe dehydration. Possibly infection. Possibly worse. "This cub won't last another hour," I said quietly. The room held its breath. As I lifted the cub, the tigress rose instantly, a low rumble vibrating from deep in her chest. Every officer tensed. Fingers hovered near triggers. "I've got him," I whispered, not to the people, but to her. Her eyes never left my hands. We moved slowly into the trauma bay. Doors stayed open. No sudden motions. The tigress followed, step for step, stopping just short of the doorway as if she understood a line she wasn't allowed to cross. 4 fluids. Cooling packs. Broad-spectrum antibiotics. Every second mattered. The cub whimpered once, a weak, broken sound. The tigress answered with a soft chuff, pressing her massive head against the doorframe, leaving a smear of fogged breath on the glass. That sound didn't come from fear. It came from hope, hanging by a thread. And while we fought to keep the cub alive, none of us yet knew the truth. This hospital was only the beginning. While we worked on the cub, law enforcement shifted focus, from the animal to the question no one wanted to ask out loud. How does a white tiger end up inside a California hospital? Detective Marisol Kane was the first to say it plainly. This didn't come from a zoo. She was right. No registered facility in the state had reported a missing tiger. No transport accidents. No permits. Which meant only one thing: illegal ownership. Security footage was pulled within minutes. Cameras caught the tigress moving through industrial streets just before dawn, keeping to shadows, avoiding traffic like she'd done it before. She wasn't lost. She was escaping. Her path led straight out of Del Norte County's old shipping district, an area packed with abandoned cold storage warehouses and fenced-off lots no one bothered to check anymore. Animal Control was contacted. So was Fish and Wildlife. And when a drone finally lifted into the air over one rusted warehouse at the edge of town, the feed went silent. Row after row of metal cages baked under the sun. Some were moving. Some weren't. And in that moment, we realized the cub fighting for life inside our hospital wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was evidence. The raid moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Within an hour, a joint task force was assembled: local police, fish and wildlife officers, and a federal wildlife crimes unit. I was asked to come along, not as a doctor this time, but as someone who could identify which animals wouldn't survive transport without immediate care. The warehouse looked abandoned from the outside. Rusted gates. Faded warning signs. Silence. Inside was anything but. Cages lined the yard and interior bays, packed so tightly there was barely room to walk between them. The smell hit first: urine, decay, heat-soaked metal. Then the sounds: coughing growls, weak cries, claws scraping steel. A mountain lion lay collapsed in one cage, sides barely moving. Nearby, a pair of exotic wolves circled endlessly, their fur patchy, eyes glassy with stress. In the far corner, I spotted something that made my chest tighten: a second tiger. Smaller. Thinner. Male. He lifted his head when he saw us, then let it drop again. That's when a shout rang out. One of the suspects bolted toward the cages, reaching inside his jacket. A rifle cracked once. The man went down. And just like that, the truth came into focus. These animals were never meant to survive. The interrogation didn't take long. One of the suspects, a young man barely out of his teens, cracked within minutes. His hands shook as he talked. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The white tigress, he said, had arrived pregnant. She was supposed to be the crown jewel. A 1-in-a-million animal, smuggled through private land routes, kept alive just long enough to sell. The cub. That wasn't part of the plan. She gave birth alone in a metal cage barely larger than her body. No Inarian. No clean water. No food fit for a nursing mother. When the cub grew weak, the handlers panicked. They didn't call a vet. They Googled. Over-the-counter meds. Wrong doses. Dirty syringes. By the time they realized they were killing the cub, it was already fading. That's when the Tigress broke the lock. Not by force, but patience. They found the cage open the next morning. The cub was gone. The mother was gone. They assumed she'd run wild. They never imagined she'd run toward people. Toward light. Toward help. Toward the only place she believed life could be saved. Once the truth was out, there was no slowing down. Every cage became a triage zone. Some animals collapsed the moment fresh water touched their tongues. Others fought, snapping, hissing, refusing help after weeks of cruelty. A sedated lynx had to be lifted by 4 people. A fox with a broken leg whimpered as splints were applied. Then we reached the far bay. Inside a narrow crate sat a young chimpanzee, arms wrapped around itself, rocking softly. When I opened the door, it reached out and grabbed my sleeve with terrifying strength, then immediately loosened its grip, as if afraid it had done something wrong. Nearby, a bald eagle stared through bent wire, one wing dragging uselessly behind it. These weren't just animals. They were evidence of a system built on suffering. Transport trucks rolled in. Specialized crates followed. Each animal was tagged, assessed, and loaded for emergency transfer to sanctuaries across the country. Back at the hospital, the cub's vitals stabilized for the first time. When I relayed the news, the tigress released a low, trembling chuff and pressed her forehead against the glass. That sound carried something I'll never forget. Relief. By sunrise, the warehouse was empty. Every living animal had been moved, some sedated, some carried, some walking shakily into transport crates as if unsure freedom was real. The scene felt unreal, like a crime scene slowly exhaling after holding its breath for years. Federal charges were filed before noon. Illegal wildlife trafficking, animal cruelty, conspiracy, endangerment of the public. The ringleader didn't speak. He didn't have to. The evidence filled the yard, blood-stained cages, falsified paperwork, microchips ripped out and tossed aside like trash. News vans arrived. Then helicopters. But inside the hospital, none of that mattered. The cub opened his eyes. Just for a second. His tiny paw twitched around my finger, weak but intentional. The monitors beeped steady and strong. Against the odds, his body was responding. The tigress was sedated briefly for transport later that day. As the medication took hold, she rested her head near the cub's incubator, breathing slow and even. For the first time since she arrived. She slept. I didn't see them again for 92 days. Work got in the way. Court statements. Media requests I declined. And a quiet need to let the story finish without me hovering over it. When I finally arrived at Cascade Ridge Wildlife Sanctuary, the air felt different, cleaner, calmer. Pine trees lined the perimeter. No bars. No concrete. Just space. The tigress saw me first. She rose from the shade of a cedar tree, muscles stronger now, coat bright and full. She didn't charge. She didn't retreat. She watched. Then something white exploded out of the grass. The cub, no longer tiny, pounced clumsily at her tail, tumbled, stood up again, and tried once more. His movements were awkward but powerful. Alive in every way that mattered. The staff told me he'd doubled his weight. His infection was gone. His lungs were strong. And more importantly, he was learning how to be a tiger. As I stood there, the tigress met my eyes. Just for a moment. No fear. No anger. Only recognition. And maybe gratitude. Standing at the fence, I realized something uncomfortable. We like to believe humans are the ones who save animals. That we're the heroes. The rescuers. The last line of defense. But that day in the hospital shattered that illusion. Because no one went looking for that tigress. She found us. She crossed roads she didn't understand, ignored instincts that screamed danger, and walked straight into a place filled with the very species she was born to fear. Not because she trusted humans, but because love left her no alternative. She didn't know what a hospital was. She didn't know what medicine was. She only knew her cub was dying, and that doing nothing meant losing him forever. That choice, made by an animal we call wild, exposed a network of cruelty, saved dozens of lives, and reminded every person involved why compassion exists in the first place. The cub will grow. One day, he may never remember the hospital lights or the glass walls or the strangers who helped him survive. But we will remember. Because sometimes, the most powerful rescue stories aren't about humans saving animals. They're about animals showing us how to be human. If this story stayed with you, there's a reason. Not because it was shocking. Not because it involved danger. But because it revealed something quietly powerful, that compassion doesn't belong to one species. What happened that night wasn't luck. It was a mother refusing to give up, and a handful of people choosing empathy over fear. And because of those choices, a life continued that never should have had a chance. Stories like this don't end when the camera stops rolling. Illegal wildlife trafficking still happens. Animals are still bred, sold, and discarded in silence, often right under our noses. That's why telling these stories matters. If you believe awareness saves lives, like this video. If you believe animals deserve protection, subscribe. And if you want more real rescue stories that expose the truth behind the headlines, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more eyes that see, the harder it becomes to look away. Thank you for staying to the end. And remember, sometimes the bravest act isn't fighting back. It's asking for help.